Throughout the Second World War, the German army and the SS would deal with threats of resistance very seriously. Across their occupied lands, thousands of people who were suspected of defying the Germans were brought to the gallows inside of towns and cities, where they were executed. Young women such as Lepa Radic were condemned to death for being involved in partisan activities, and inside of France there was a huge resistance element that eventually would help to liberate the country from Hitler's rule and regime. But to be part of the French resistance was incredibly dangerous, and if caught, the Gestapo would arrest people, torture and interrogate them, and then condemn them to death. The whole point of the Nazi occupation was to strike fear into the hearts of the locals and to scare them into submission. But inside of France there was one woman who would pay the ultimate price for her role in the resistance, but before she was brutally executed, Charlotte Leitner had been a successful model who had worked inside of Paris, modelling for some very famous fashion brands. But as the war came to her doorstep, she took action. Join us today as we look at the brutal execution of the French model, shot by the SS. And remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Charlotte Leitner was born on the 19th of December 1907 in New York, and she emigrated with her parents as a young woman to her family's native Poland, and then in 1924 she moved to France and Paris. She completed an apprenticeship, however she was noticed by one of the best fashion houses in Paris for her looks. She was known as a beautiful woman, and she would model for some incredibly famous brands, including Elizabeth Arden. Whilst modelling, she began a literature course, and she would, in 1933, meet Jacques Trollet de Prévost. He had a successful and brilliant career in the Navy, and had become a captain, but at the start of the Second World War, he remained loyal to the government and the Vichy regime. He was later appointed president of the Naval Tribunal of Toulon, and whilst here he established contacts with the French resistance, and he became known to the Franco-Polish intelligence network known as F2. Prévost would work as an informer to F2 under the name Vox, and his wife Charlotte would take the codename Carlo, and the pair would obtain information about the German Navy, and they would then pass this on. They were working as spies for the Germans' enemies, which was incredibly dangerous. Within a decade, Charlotte had gone from working as a model in the Paris fashion houses to now living a sheltered life as a member of the French resistance. Her husband would later become the head of the network called Anne. The F2 network was later disbanded to protect the agents from arrest, but Prévost and Charlotte would be in control of a branch that covered Marseille, Toulon and Nice. They would learn about more German naval and air units, and then they passed this information on. They also learned of the coastal defences and fortifications, and these secrets were then passed to the Allies. But Charlotte and her husband had been living dangerously for some time, and they began to attract unwanted attention from the German authorities inside of Paris. The Gestapo were hunting down many different resistors, and people suspected of being involved in selling and passing secrets. The Gestapo in France were notoriously brutal, and they would lock up suspects and torture them terribly inside of prisons. Some were even killed by their ordeals at the hands of the Gestapo. Charlotte fought for the resistance also in the south of France for a number of years before she was arrested by the Germans on the 29th of March 1944. She was in Nice when the Gestapo broke down and shattered the door to her room, and they then led her away. She was interrogated a number of times the next day and was imprisoned at Fort de Montluc. The Germans treated her very well, and they did not know she was in fact of Jewish origin. She would have been treated much worse if they knew this, but she was allowed to have special concessions and privileges compared to other prisoners. If the Gestapo knew the truth, she would have probably been deported immediately to a concentration camp, or would have immediately been scheduled for execution. She was held inside of Fort de Montluc for a number of months. This was a prison which was used by the Gestapo, and it had a history of many prisoners being shot within the walls. It's believed that 15,000 during the Second World War were imprisoned there, and over 900 were executed within it. But as the war was turning heavily against the Germans following D-Day and the Normandy invasions, the Allies were pushing the Germans further back. The orders to execute prisoners inside of prisons was given, and many of these were liquidated. On August 19, 1944, At 7 p.m, the fatal order to execute prisoners rang out in Fort de Montluc. The officer in charge yelled out the names in the corridor of those who were going to be executed, and he bellowed 3 women's names and then Charlotte's name. Charlotte believed to begin with she was going to be liberated, and she thought she was in fact going to be freed, but this was not the case. Minutes later she realised that she would in fact be executed, and because of this, the joy turned to sorrow and upset. She was led out of her prison cell by officers, and the 3 women, who were all crying, accompanied her. They left the prison building and were then handed over to a group of SS executioners. These men were heavily armed and they manhandled the women. They shouted abuse at the women, and then things turned violent as they battered Charlotte and the others with their rifle butts, and then they threw and shoved the women onto a truck. Charlotte Leitner and the other women were then taken to the airfield in Born, which was 10 kilometres from the centre of Lyon, near to where they had been held. They may have believed at this moment that they were being repatriated by aircraft to other nations, but this would not be the case. At the airfield, a number of trenches and shell holes had been made, and the women, including Charlotte, were then told to go and stand on the edge of the trench and the pit. Then an execution squad made up of machine gunners emerged, and Charlotte would have known her final moments were soon to be over. As she stood on the edge of the pit, the executioners fired their machine guns, and Charlotte Leitner was executed and killed. She fell into the pit in the trench, and the Germans were so hasty in their killing that they did not even make sure that she was dead, and she wasn't given a coup de grace or anything, and her body and the body of the other women was then covered with earth and rubble very, very quickly. The executions carried out on the airfield were some of the final and last ones performed by the Nazis before they did flee Lyon from the Allies. 109 prisoners in total would be taken to this specific airfield, where they were killed, and Charlotte Leitner was just one of those numbers. She was a woman who was a well-known model inside of Paris. However, as the Second World War came to France, her life would be changed and turned completely upside down. Alongside her naval husband, she played a key role in defying the German armed forces, and today her story is one which is forgotten, but certainly deserves to be more well known and talked about. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.